Can I welcome you to the November meeting of the Children, Young People and Lifelong Learning Committee. Could I remind everyone present that this meeting will be recorded and the recording will subsequently be made available for public listening. Okay, so moving to the agenda. Sederunt and apologies. Nick?
Thanks, Chair. We've got apologies from Councillors Brodie and Hislop. All other councillors are present.
Thank you. Item 2, declarations of interest. Do you have any declarations of interest? No. Okay. So moving on to item 3, the minutes of the meeting of 19th of September 2017. Can we agree that they're correct? Thank you. Moving on to item 4 on page 7. Statutory Consultation A, Garlieston and Kirkbean Primary Schools. Members will be aware of the prominence in the media and indeed communications from stakeholders around the statutory consultations on the future of A, Garlieston and Kirkbean Primary Schools. Within our region, there's a preponderance in favour of rural schools. We have 71 schools classified as this, which is 62%. This is proportionally much higher than other local authorities. Indeed, it's more so than the Highlands and Islands, Shetland and other regions. So it could be argued possibly that we should be discussing with the Scottish Government on a funding model which reflects this. We know that schools are precious to their communities, but the Council still has an obligation to consider the use of schools when the pupils' number cause concern around potential viability. Now, one positive aspect of this process can be to focus minds and efforts within communities to work hard to not only keep the schools open, but consider ways to ensure their long-term growth and sustainability. Fundamentally, we need to regard these schools as community assets from which we deliver education, amongst many other users. Following the consultation process, officers are recommending that members agree to keeping each school open with a subsequent 5-year moratorium. This process has been emotional for many, and Colin and Claire are here to answer questions. Claire, do you have anything to add to your report?
Nothing further to add at this stage.
Members? Katie?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I just wanted to welcome really point 3.10 within the committee, which has a commitment from the Director to go out to each school and to follow up from this consultation, and also to thank the Director for addressing some of the points that have been raised specifically from Garlieston School. I was contacted by the PTA and there has been consultation done and there has been questions answered. So I just wanted to thank that there has been a commitment made for the Director to go to the school. And I was also wanting to just seek some sort of clarity, because I was aware of and I attended a meeting at another school which didn't go forward in the consultation process, but I'm just looking for some sort of acknowledgement that if there's any other schools out with the 3 that have been mentioned in the report, that they're not going to be put through the same process.
Claire?
I would confirm that there's no other schools that are planned or part of that process.
Jim?
Thanks, Chair. There is a fairly vital piece of information here which requires to be corrected. On page 46, item 8, the conclusion. That conclusion should refer to Garlieston Primary School, since A has already been mentioned on page 30.
Okay, we'll correct that. Yep.
Thank you.
Okay. Other indications? John?
This whole process has been a catalogue of errors which has brought us to, I'm very glad to say, has brought us to a satisfactory conclusion. And these 3 schools are saved, and the locals will be very pleased about that, and they've got a 5-year moratorium on any further action. But I have to say, Chairman, that it should never have got to this stage of such animosity between the council and between local people. Now, I can only speak for A, because that's within the ward which you and I represent. But it raised all sorts of issues where people thought that the council was against them. And I would just like to remind people that within our council plan, the council is stating that we have to be an inclusive council and ensure that local people and communities are at the heart of our decision making, and that we should empower our communities to make the most of their assets and to increase the equality of opportunity. We have also undertaken to protect the most vulnerable people, and it'll be no surprise to you in the ward which you represent with me that there are a lot of poor people in poverty and are vulnerable people, and there are more of these vulnerable and poor people in the countryside than there are in the towns. This is where it really lies. And so we should be doing everything that we could to support these schools, not to close them. And I think the council behaved, and I don't include myself in that, because I was one of the people who voted for the school to stay open, which is more than most of the people here can say that they did. But it has now come to those of us who are proved right that the schools should stay open, that we should reflect as a council on the decision that was made on that day and what has happened to these communities who've been put through the rack of fear to keep their schools open. I think the level of acceptance of local input was very poor. I think there was a degree of bias in the reporting. And I think there was some, I hesitate to use the word, that I won't use it here. I hate it was some unfair persuasion on the people who were trying to keep their school open. And we as a council owe the people of A an apology for the way that this was all handled. And as we say in the newspapers, the council admits errors on school closure bids, and they're right to admit that. But there should also be an apology by the way it was handled all the way down. And if it wasn't for these very, very good local people who really looked into the problem that kept these schools open, that the correct decision, and I compliment the director now in making that decision, that these schools will stay open. But it's been a very sorry episode in the council for those of you who voted to close the school.
On that point, yeah.
Point of clarification, just on that, there's been a statement made where people voted to close the school. Not one person in this chamber voted to close the school. And if Councillor Charteris was at that meeting, he would know that, unless he wasn't listening, unless he was just grandstanding like he normally does. Not one person in here voted to close the school, but we did vote to go out to a consultation to see what the community feedback was.
Alan, do you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just maybe in by way of addressing a couple of points that are raised by the councillor there, I would have to agree with Councillor Nicholson. Nobody here had voted to close the school. We certainly had agreed to start a consultation process. And as the Chair said earlier, as a council, we've got a responsibility to look at all of our schools and whether they're viable, and that's part of what we do. However, if communities feel that they felt that the council was some way against them, then I would apologise for that, because that shouldn't be the intention. I don't, and I'm sorry if people did feel that way. What I would say is that the community aspect of the council plan and the emphasis on community in the council plan was voted through after we'd taken the decision to look at the educational position. So the council plan was agreed mid-process. I think it was in recognising, in part, the emphasis on community in the council plan and the very positive response that we got from the community that we began to move fairly quickly to see if we could provide members with an early opportunity to bring certainty to the process.
Thank you, Chair. I would just like to draw Councillor Charteris's and indeed every member's attention to 3.1. I mean, he said, and he quoted the council plan to make the most of their asset, and exactly what this committee voted for was the engagement process will serve to identify and rationalise utilisation with the aim to look at sustainable futures for the schools. I think that it's fair to say that every member here, while I disagree with many, will vote and do whatever they feel necessary on this committee to do the best by young people and by our children. That is what this committee did, and you know, we have the outcome and we will take that vote shortly, but just to make exactly clear what I voted for and what many others here voted for was that engagement process to ensure a better and more sustainable future for these schools and for our young people's learning.
Thank you, Adam. Ian?
Thank you, Chairman. My recollection of the meeting is the same as the directors, that we certainly voted to go to a consultation process. It wasn't on particularly on school closures. It may have been in a way to reduce the capacity of schools, which would allow them to stay open. However, I'm a bit concerned over the really lack of apology. If you go to paragraph 310, it speaks about the directors committed to visit each school. And the very last sentence, these will be detailed and an apology given around the relevant items. We've got quite a few members of the parents of these schools affected here today, and I would have thought this would have been an appropriate time to issue an apology, both from the Education Department and from the Education Authority.
Well, the Director is going to go out to each of these parent councils and speak to them and issue any apologies as necessary. I think obviously people can attend these parent councils if they so wish. And I do think it's important to emphasise the fact that this wasn't about closure of the school, it was about best use of the schools within the community. And education, together with the council ward workers, will now work with the schools in order to sustain them in the future. Can we move to the recommendations? Can we note 2.1, the progress with the statutory consultation process with regard to A, Garlieston and Kirkbean primary schools as detailed at 3.3 to 3.6. And 2.2, agree following the representations made as part of the initial consultation on the public proposal paper to support the recommendation for A, Garlieston and Kirkbean primary schools to remain open and with a 5-year moratorium as per the requirements of the Children and Young People Scotland Act 2014. Thank you. Ian?
I'd like to put an additional recommendation that a formal apology is made to the groups here today.
Adam?
If a motion is being put forward, I'd like to put forward an amendment that we stick with the recommendations as they are. It's already been noted in 3.10 that the Director will go out to make an apology. I don't believe it's sensible for any member to suggest that a Director or any member of council staff should have to hang themselves out in front of a committee. I think it's quite disrespectful, actually.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm happy to second it if need be. Ian, do you have a second?
Quite possibly, but I'd just like to say I'm not being disrespectful at all. I'm saying an apology from the Education Department and from this committee. I'm taking personalities out of it.
Adam, are you prepared to adjust your motion?
I mean, my amendment is, or motion quite happily is to stick with the recommendations.
David?
Could you seek clarity on what the apology is for, please?
Chair, with your permission, very happy to say what I intend to say when I go to see each of the schools.
Chair, before you do,
Yeah.
that's not for the director to do that today. And you need to seek governance on whether or not it's an appropriate motion, because there's no evidence to suggest it's requirement, nor indeed it's appropriate.
Nick, can you give us some advice on that?
Well, I think, firstly, Chair, a suggestion was made that clarity be provided as to what an apology, what the apology was to be given for. Might be helpful.
Ian?
Certainly we embarked on a process, albeit in good faith, but that process was found to be faulty. And because of that faulty process, a number of parents and children have been and staff have been deeply upset with that. And that's the apology.
Okay, I think we'll go to the vote on this.
Is that accurate? I mean, is governance happy that is an appropriate amendment? Because we are following, don't forget, committee papers and evidence presented to us. I don't imagine that we should apologise if something happened later on that's come to light, and therefore there is a real issue about whether or no it's an appropriate motion or amendment.
Chair, yes, can I just get clarity from what I'm hearing from Councillor Blake is that we're apologising for the consultation that happened. Now, it's my understanding that this consultation is set out as a national framework. So, the council isn't actually responsible for the way that the steps that were taken. The council is responsible, I believe, in making sure the process was done correctly. But an apology in terms of the actual consultation, I understand. Can I just get some clarity here, because I don't understand why we would be apologising in terms of a framework that is actually being put in place by government, not by council.
Sure, Councillor Blake will enlighten us.
Certainly the consultation process was no doubt forward by the Scottish Government, but the interpretation of it within Dumfries and Galloway was found to be flawed, and that's why we have gone back on that.
Nick? Gail?
Sorry, as the seconder of the motion, I think we're beginning to tie ourselves up in knots as usual. At 3.1 it says quite explicitly that these will be detailed and an apology given. So there must be some substance to that apology. And I think all we're asking is that as an authority and a committee that we reinforce the apology that is already going to be given at a later date.
Well, I think that is the issue. The apology will be given at a later date to each of these individual schools. Nick, can we have your advice on the governance issue?
I think we're straying into a grey area here in terms of if it's certainly not something that's contained within the remit of the committee. The director has alluded to, has made an apology in terms of how people may have perceived incorrectly or not, as the case may be, how the procedure worked. I think it's ultimately, it's a matter for the committee if we wish to proceed on moving to a vote on whether we should simply go with the recommendations as contained in the report, or whether members do wish to consider whether the committee should move to offer an apology. I just think it's not ultimately a governance matter.
In that case, I think we should go to a vote on this.
Okay, so before I move to call the vote, I'll just clarify that in terms of the motion, that's as proposed by Councillor Blake in relation to an apology being issued. The amendment as proposed by Councillor Wilson, that the committee simply agree the recommendations as contained in the papers. Councillor Lever?
Amendment.
Councillor Surtees?
Amendment.
Councillor Blake?
Motion.
Councillor Campbell?
Amendment.
Councillor Carruthers?
Motion.
Councillor Charteris.
Motion.
Councillor Davidson.
Amendment.
Councillor Dempster.
Amendment.
Councillor Giusti.
Motion.
Councillor Hagman.
Amendment.
Councillor Hislop isn't present. Councillor Inglis.
Motion.
Councillor Little.
Amendment.
Councillor McGregor.
Motion.
Councillor McComb.
Motion.
Councillor McKee.
Amendment.
Councillor Nicholson.
Amendment.
Councillor Stitt.
Amendment.
Councillor Tate.
Motion.
Councillor Wilson.
Amendment.
Mr McQuiston. Reverend McFadden.
Abstention.
Ms Wilson's absent. Mr Jameson. You're not voting on those. Okay, so that's in favour of the motion, Chair, are 8. In favour of the amendment are 11, with 2 abstentions. So the amendment is carried.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to actually put down for the minute that having been at various meetings with the council officers and with the PTA at Garlieston, I've been really supportive of the community, and I have been in touch with the director regarding this. And actually, I would just go back to point out that 3.10, there is a commitment for the council to apologise in terms of this. Despite the fact that I have voted with the amendment, I would just like it on record that I wanted to go back to my first point that I made at the opening of this debate. Thank you.
Ian?
Chairman, surely that item was finished. There should be no further discussion on that.
Yeah, I don't think we can mint as such, but it's obviously on the recording. Okay, can we move to item 5 on page 69? Children and Young People and Lifelong Learning Services Revenue Budget Monitoring Report 2017-18 for the period ended 30th September 2017. This report provides members an overview of key budget monitoring issues and projected performance against budget for the current financial year for Children, Young People and Lifelong Learning Committee services based on the position as of the 30th of September 2017. That based on the position as at the end of September 2017, SIPL services are projected to break even against the 2017-18 agreed budget with £273,000 of measures to be identified to achieve this position. It's worth noting, as in given in 3.1, that represents 0.17% of the budget. And we have Colin Pentland to speak to this. Is there anything you want to add, Colin?
Not this time, Chair.
Okay, I'll throw it up to the floor. Members? No. In that case, can we move to the recommendations? Can we note 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, and 2.4? Thank you. So if we move on to item 6, Dumfries Learning Town, the Bridge Educational Trust, which is on page 79.
Chairman, sorry. There's maybe some people here that are feeling a bit awkward about going after the item's been heard now.
Good point, Gail. If anybody wants to leave, we can have a break for a couple of minutes now to allow you to make your escape. Okay, members. Item 6, Dumfries Learning Town, the Bridge Educational Trust. Any member who's driven past the Cuckoo Bridge roundabout will have noted rapid progress with the building of the bridge facility, and indeed the other new builds and refurbishments around the town. This paper is seeking agreement to governance arrangements. Education Committee agreed in September 2015 that officers develop a proposal for a community company model to govern the bridge, as well as to set out the positive and negative aspects of that proposal. In November 2015, Education Committee considered these matters and agreed to progress this model. In June 2016, members of Policy and Resources Committee agreed to grant a long lease to the community company once established to deliver and operate the facility on King George V site, subject to the community company being established. This report provides an update and asks members to agree also to add an ad hoc Bridge Education Trust subcommittee. The Director will answer questions on the development of the facility itself, and Rona Lewis can answer any questions around the trust and regulator. Okay, members? John?
I was just wondering about the bridge when I was looking at the trust constitution. It all seems to come from government, from our own council, and there's no members of the public who are going to go on this trust. So I think it's going to be quite an inward-looking trust because it's got a council officer, a head teacher, elected members of Dumfries and Galloway Council, Education Scotland Community Learning and Development, Dumfries and Galloway College, the SRUC, a trustee from the University of the West of Scotland, and 2 co-opted trustees. Now, I think that is balanced in the wrong way of getting a much broader view about how this trust should run, because they're all public people who are paid for by various educational bodies. And I think we should have, I see there are 2 co-opted trustees who could be put out to businessmen or others, but I think it should be a greater percentage of that with a lot of talented people, as we've seen of the first thing we looked at, who would be good on this. But it's too inward-looking, this constitution, and I would like the director to look at it again, the proposal, not to have a maximum of 2 co-opted trustees. I think there should be 4.
Right.
Yep. Chair, it's entirely a matter for members to decide in terms of the constitution. The only guidance and restrictions we have is to ensure that the council is not in a majority on the board, because that would be against the principles that Oscar worked to on this. So in terms of the makeup of the rest of the board or how it's composed, it's entirely a matter for this committee to decide, and that can be put to Oscar in the draft constitution.
Okay.
4 co-opted trustees, I'd like to propose.
Rona?
So, Chair, can I just clarify? So you would wish another 2, the maximum number of charity trustees to be 12, and an extra 2, or would you want any changes to the rest of the committee?
No, I would expect 2 of these people would not be trustees, leaving room for 2 more co-opted trustees to come on.
Well, I'm quite happy with the proposal as is. I think you've got to have a a reasonable input from the educational deliverers within the area.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't understand the full implication of the suggestion. Would that mean that two of the organisations named would effectively drop off, and in which case, which? If it's not an overall increase, which I took that to mean. If it's not an overall increase, then two of the organisations listed would have to drop off, and we would have to pick which two, and I wonder how we would go about doing that.
Councillor Charteris?
Well, I only wanted to balance the trustee, because I think it's too educationally centred. I think it needs to be a bit wider, have wider advice. I mean, if people think 4 is too much by taking off 2 of these educationalists and putting on 2 more trustees, I would understand that and maybe go for 3 altogether. But I think we need to balance the number of people, and I think I would certainly go for businessmen to come as trustees on here.
Rob, you want to back on that?
Please, Chairman, you're being most patient, and not just with me. I think the issue is that in order to give effect to the decision, and there are good points and bad points to it, and I'm not entirely unsympathetic, but nevertheless, what we're being given here is a list. If we are to reduce the list by 2, we must also today determine which 2 we are going to remove. Now, they all seem to be here for good and proper reasons. For an educational establishment, it stands to reason that it would be heavily weighted in favour of educationalists. So which 2 is it to be?
Ball's in your court, John.
Myself, Chairman.
I shouldn't consider he would have any difficulty with that, Chairman.
I could select 1 or 2 people in here I'd like to practice on first.
I think we could all do that.
I think I would leave it to the choice to the director of education. If we do think that if we're going to go ahead with what I'm proposing, to get the balance correct.
Adam?
Thank you, Chair. I think it's important that, as you know, it's education, that we have a number of educational professionals on the board. However, I do believe that this is not the last time that we will see this document, and that if Councillor Charteris really would like to see some businessmen make the decisions over our future of our kids' education in this particular trust, then he could maybe discuss that with officers in the meantime and flesh it out.
David?
I just wonder, is there any reason why both the University of Glasgow and the West of Scotland shouldn't be on? Is that too many on the board? Is that the problem? Okay.
Yes, proposal that they should have 1 each, but that was restricted to allow for both the chair and vice chair of SIPL to sit on the board. And I think, just to clarify, I think we have been trying to get a balance to ensure that there was input. If it is helpful, as I said, the maximum number can be increased if that were thought to be a compromise that would assist.
Jim?
Thanks, Chair. I'm seeking clarification on the co-options themselves. In 3.15, it states that these positions are open to advert, as well as applications invited from interested parties. How are you going to equate these 2 methods of co-option, open to advert or by invitation?
Rona?
The reason it was worded in this way, Councillor McComb, was that, you know, at different times the trust will require different expertise. So there may be a need sometimes to ask someone to co-opt them to come and help, or else you may be looking for very particular, as Councillor Charter said, perhaps some business input or entrepreneurial thought in the process. So at different times, at the lifetime of the trust, it was envisaged that different people with different skills might be required. So this allows both options to be used.
Does that allow temporary members who have particular expertise?
It would be open at the point of advertisement or invitation to put a term on how long you would expect that person to serve. That would be entirely a matter for the board to do that.
George?
I'd just like to make the point that there's two co-opted members. I would support the argument that there's a case to be made for somebody from a non-educational background to be on that board. Government and all parties have taken on board the fact that education should link more with employability and commercial industry, things like that. So I think one of the trustees, there should be some sort of terms of reference that there should be some element of industry, some commercial expertise, just for a different context.
But presumably that can be built into it anyway, in terms of the co-opted members. Yeah.
Thanks, Chair. Just to reassure everybody, I suppose we are trying to get the right balance here. It is an educational establishment. If we were only inward looking, we'd have built another bit of a school, and we haven't done that. We've tried to, in fact, it's a unique selling point. I don't think there's any other facility in Scotland that is anything like this, and we're trying to look outward in terms of both other educational establishments, opportunities for young people. But we are very clear that we want to have some business people involved, because not only in terms of a context, in terms of industry, we'd like some entrepreneurial acumen to try and get to a stage where the facility might even be self-sufficient. So we do want to include that, but the major number of stakeholders need to have that key focus on education. So we hope we've got the right balance, but we'll certainly take advice as we move through from members in getting that.
So I think what we come down to now is whether we do increase the number of members or substitute some of the educational aspect by other co-opted members. Personally, I'm content with the proposals as laid out in the document, the draft document. Ronnie, then Adam.
No, I think you're right, Chair. I think once the board is up and going, they will then have a feel for the expertise that's needed, and then they can maybe come back and they could probably increase it if need be.
Adam?
No, Ronnie's just took my point, so.
John?
Well, going on from what we've heard, what would I think be best for the bridge would be to have 4 co-opted members and leave the rest the same.
So you make that a motion?
I'll make it a motion now. I'll propose that we have 4 co-opted members.
Adam?
Can I just ask officers what they think of that and any, implications, particularly legal side, but also, in the running of the trust?
I mean, an increase to 12, I mean, it's still, I think, manageable in terms of a board, and you always have to think that not everyone can come along to every board meeting anyway, so there'll be apologies. So I think it's workable. I don't see anything wrong in law in increasing it, and I think it would be acceptable to Oscar as well. It's entirely a matter for members to decide.
Chair, I'll second John Charteris's motion.
Thanks, Chair. Again, simply because we've been asked for an opinion, I suppose, as officers. I really don't have any worries about 4 co-opted members, as long as there was a spread and balance of who those were. I'm not certain that 4 people from business would be perfect. It might be 2, and say, for example, 2 parents. Two different types of stakeholders. So I think there's an opportunity to get a different type of balance, and I certainly wouldn't be against having 4 co-opted members.
Rob?
But, Chairman, I guess it might be workable if we were not looking at reducing the existing stakeholders that were set out. To me, that was the principal concern, that we would cherry pick one or two out of the list today, which would be unjustifiable. But if the advice that we are getting is that it's workable, then potentially there's no reason why we should not.
Okay, so are we happy to increase the cooperative members by 2, keeping the rest as is in the proposed document? Okay. Right. Move to the recommendations. Can we note the progress made to develop the Bridge Educational Trust as detailed at 310 to 312? Note the draft Bridge Education Trust Constitution as detailed at Appendix 2 as modified as per the discussion. And this will be submitted to the Office of the Scottish Charity Regulator, OSCR. And 2.3, can we agree to establish an ad hoc Bridge Educational Trust subcommittee as detailed at 319 to 321? No, well, that's been recorded. Okay, thank you.
Chair, sorry. So can I just confirm that we will have, it will be a subcommittee of SIPL and not of full council? Is that what members wish to do?
I would imagine so, yeah. Members content with that? Yeah. Okay, so if we move on to item 7 on page 113. This is the amendment to enrolling in schools policy. In December and January each year, parents make choices for their child's school. We are asked questions on the criteria for places and making sure we have spaces for all catchment children. We are occasionally also involved in the appeal process. This is a paper to make the admissions process for our schools clear for parents and for ourselves. So we have Jonathan and Gillian to speak to this. Is there anything you wish to add to the paper?
I can give a brief summary of the background and a little bit of the amendments that we've tried to include within the enrolling in schools policy, which is now entitled School Admission Policy for Dumfries and Galloway. So basically, as a council, we have a duty to provide adequate and efficient school education for all youngsters, all children living in Dumfries and Galloway. In practice, officers have to monitor school places to manage the school roles now and predict them for the future in order to make the estate work as efficiently and effectively as we possibly can. We know it's not always possible to have the right places at the right time for all the children that we want to accept in our schools, and that can be a challenge for us. We know that demographics change over the course of time. We know that new buildings create some challenges for us in terms of the attraction of moving into schools and school communities. As a council, we have a clear set of criteria which hasn't changed in terms of the priority in which we offer the places for youngsters, and it's the children who are living within the designated catchment that are always offered the places first, and then we look at the criteria below that, which is illustrated within the policy. We also have the challenge, which can be a challenge for the local authority in terms of parental requests, because parents have the absolute right to request any school which they wish, and we have a duty to provide that space for the children, if we can provide that within the existing resources that we have, whether that be material resources such as school buildings, or indeed the human resources, in particular these challenging times where there is a national shortage of teachers across the country. The paper also asks members to consider the process of managing the annual S1 intake for pupils within Dumfries in order to make sure that we have got an appropriate investment plan and the new buildings are fit for purpose. The policy sets out the decisions on how the school's admissions are made and how appeals are about unsuccessful placing appeals are conducted. We have brought, in essence, many of our policies together, members, to try and ensure that it is an outward-facing policy, and the policy allows parents to have a one-stop shop and therefore understand the process in which they go about enrolling their children in our schools. We did have policies, we have existing policies which supported a lot of the decision-making from parents, they were in different places at different times, and therefore, depending on where parents came into the process, there potentially was a lack of understanding from parents, which we have uncovered over an appeals process over a period of time. And the last part to the policy I'd like to highlight is the inclusion of the resourced panels admission for children with additional support needs, where we have a series of panels set up, which I believe are currently meeting and will continue to meet prior to the enrolment date, which is at the end of January for our new enrolments in Primary 1. And the panels will make decisions about the most appropriate provision for children who have got significant additional support needs, and potentially you might describe them as learning centres, to ensure that the learning centres are being are there to support the children who have got significant additional support needs. So I take the paper to you, members. I do apologise because I understand that within the paper there are two slight errors under 2.2 in the recommendation. The additional support needs should be described in section 7 of Appendix 1. Apologies for that. It does say section 8. And the appeal procedure is actually in section 9, not section 10. So that's within Appendix 1. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, John. Members? Ian?
Thank you, Chairman. I do have some reservations about this paper that's presented today. One of my two first points was the confusion on the recommendations, but that's just been clarified. Having read through the various sections, I couldn't see any relevance to what came out in the recommendations. If you look at paragraph 3.4 of the report that refers to the school's admissions policy at sections 4 and 8 of the revised policy, the report only makes reference to the school admissions policy and makes no mention of the capping policy that was applied and yet successfully challenged earlier by parents. Can I ask, has this capping policy now been repealed? And if so, and it's maybe my day for apologising when I'm wrong, has an apology been made to the parents and children that were put under a great deal of stress with the capping policy? In relation to if the capping policy has been withdrawn, what effect will this have on the Dumfries Learning Town project?
Director?
If I could just, it may be easier just to run through and then all means I could recap. Paragraph 3.7 on the third line, the years are shown as 2006/6. I don't really see what this actually means. Paragraph 3.8 states there no one definitive cause for the rise in placing requests and subsequent appeals. Is it not the case that because of the catchment area has been changed and the capping policy introduced and now possibly suspended, that children were not being placed in the schools closest to them, but were placed in other schools in order to increase the school rolls, and then only to be transported there at public expense? Surely I would like some agreement, if possible, that this was one of the main reasons for the increase in appeals. Paragraph 3.10 refers to the changes in the policies in terms of title, format and appearance, and states that it does not require agreement by the committee. In my opinion, considering the 2016 policy ran to 3.5 pages, and the proposed new amended policy now runs to 13 pages, there must be significant changes, and in view of that, I think it does require proper member scrutiny and needs to be properly risk assessed, considering that there were certainly risks identified with the former policy when the flawed capping policy came in. I have numerous other points to raise with regard to the proposed policy at Appendix 1. However, at this stage, in view of the errors and omissions contained within the report, I would like to propose that this report be withdrawn today and reconsidered and amended to include the omissions before being presented for member approval.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Happy to answer a number of those questions. I'm not aware of significant omissions or errors in the paper. Certainly there was a typo around section 8 and section 10. I'll pick up first of all though on the capping question. I think it's really important, this one, that we're really clear about it, and I know it's been the subject of some communication. Like a number of authorities in the country, we've looked to try harder to plan for the future. Members of this committee have seen situations where there have been parents that are heartbroken because they're in a catchment and actually can't get a place because actually non-catchment places in the past had been given. So we've tried to future plan a little bit better. And in trying to future plan, looked at what other authorities had done around future proofing, and certainly there is one of the clauses in the legislation surrounding reasons for refusal can be about future costs that might arise by accepting a non-catchment application. So we looked to future proof in terms of the learning town, and we asked you to agree last year to a policy that allowed for capping processes. That was an agreement to set a set intake for S1 pupils across the Dumfries Borough schools, and we gave numbers for that, and we asked that you agree that we set those numbers and allowed us to use a capping process, therefore, to refuse entry in terms of future proofing for the future sizes of the schools. Okay. What happened then was that we initially refused maybe, I think it was either 12 or 20 young people on that basis. However, at appeal stage, a question was asked around the legality in the legislation there, and the clerk suggested that he wasn't comfortable fully, that we were fully compliant, particularly in terms of the timing, without the certainty of the build arrangements, while we'd had other advice as well legally. I think officers decided that they would ask for an adjournment to get full advice on that. That adjournment wasn't able to take place, and officers decided not to contest the appeal, particularly with a young person at the centre of that. Following that non-contestment, we went back and did apologise to the parents who previously had been refused and offered them all a place. So that was done. What we're saying really about moving on is we're trying to apply a bit of common sense here. We were working to a timetable for the learning town and a plan for the learning town, and unfortunately some of the international and national fiscal winds have blown against that, and so we haven't had confirmation of funding from the government. We haven't had as much confirmation as we would like to set out the plan. Therefore, the plan is less certain just at the moment. Not that it won't happen, but in terms of timing, and we felt therefore it wasn't reasonable to ask you again this year to apply a level of maximum intake in S1 when there were spaces and we weren't certain about when the schools would be built. So for that reason, it's not that we've rescinded the policy, we simply on year would have come back and asked for a maximum intake, and we're not asking to do that this year. So hopefully that clarifies that part of it for you. And certainly if we come back to you next year and sit with a bit more certainty around the builds and come back and say we would like to apply a capping or a maximum intake, we'll have a full legal review before we do that and have full confidence to give you. So that I hope covers that part, Councillor Blake. I know you had a number of questions, but that's the situation with the capping. Related to that, what you said was that if we don't apply a maximum intake across your schools in first year, what impact that might have on, for example, the opening up of North West Campus. And what we would like to feel is that in any school in Dumfries Borough should be offering an absolute outstanding opportunity. We think that the new school in North West, which is traditionally sometimes not attracted all of its kids, Maxwellton High was not attracting all the kids from the catchment area. We'd like to think that the new school, the new build, and everything that we're doing around collaboration will even that out, and we're quite confident that all of the 4 schools will be well used.
Ian, want to come back on that?
Yeah, first of all, to thank the Director for his reply to that. Just asked him to confirm that should you decide next year to come forward with a capping policy, this will come before this committee for consideration.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. Every year we'd have to come to you with a number for each school in terms of you agreeing the maximum intake. So that is a capping process. Okay.
Okay, if I could have the answers to the other points.
Jim?
Thank you, Chair.
I was intrigued with one of the points that Ian Blake raised, because on 2 different occasions I've had to do the same thing with staff for a school in my area, where we have a number of non-catchment pupils in the school. Family moves in late in the year. We then don't have a place for that child, although the child may be able to throw a stone and hit that school. We're busing that child away several miles to a school. The child doesn't get the opportunity to integrate with the rest of the pupils that he or she will hopefully be mixing with. It's a huge issue about how we ensure there's enough capacity left for families that move in. We should not be finding ourselves in a position whereby, and Ian has already said it, we are funding transport for children that could theoretically walk to school. I don't think that's acceptable. And I know in the past there was a policy that told parents, or there was a situation that advised parents that they weren't guaranteed an ongoing place year on year. If new pupils came into the area, their child might have to find another school. Clearly we don't do that. Therefore, we have to find a way of making sure that we do not disadvantage children that are moving into an area and living nearby a school. We don't deny them the social aspect of their educational opportunities. And we should not either be picking up bills because parents choose to go to specific schools and in doing so deny people living in the area the opportunity to send their kids there.
John?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Dempster. I think when we've experienced that on numerous occasions, and I think you and I have actually had conversations around about that. And you'll recall in 2014, I think it was, that we introduced the reserved places policy to try and offer some element of protection for families who are potentially moving into local catchment areas. It's a very difficult policy to police, and it's a very difficult policy to actually implement all of the time in all of the class bases because of the nature of classrooms and so class formation, if you like, class configuration and so on. But you know, that is a challenge for the council in terms of how do we ensure that parental choice is available for everybody, but also being able to provide for the catchment children within a community. I think that's one of the challenges we face on an annual basis.
I would have to say it's not a criticism of John, because we've jousted about it between us for a long time and on a number of occasions. But it is an issue that we need to be aware of. It's a serious problem in some schools. John obviously does his best in the best interests of the whole, or the collective of children. But I just always feel a bit sensitive when we're transporting kids out, subjecting them to early leaving of their homes, moving in a vehicle when they could chuck a stone at their own school. There is something wrong and it's not John's fault, but we need to try and do something to fix it.
Jim?
Thanks, Chair. I can entirely understand the logic behind the reserved places. Now, I can see how it operates in a primary school. How does it operate in a secondary context?
No, you're absolutely correct. It's not a reserved policy, reserved places in secondary. It's reserved in primary for every class base.
So, are there no reserved places in secondary?
I can clarify, no, there aren't. And the reason for that is, as a former secondary head teacher, I can tell you, unless it was actually the case that the building was physically full and you couldn't bring somebody else in, it is always possible to accommodate a child looking to move in the middle of a year, for example. The difficulty might be that they might not be able to get all the subject choices that they want, but it wouldn't be the case that they couldn't physically attend the school. So it's really primary that's the issue around reserved places. Okay.
Julie?
Opportunity to respond to Councillor Blake's point regarding the policy. I think I can assure members that the policy, the material within the policy is as the existing policy, but I do recognise that it's gone from 3 pages to 13, 15 pages long, and that was very much in an effort, as John highlighted in introduction, that we want to make sure parents are absolutely clear on the process that they have to follow and the process that we go through to give members and to give both members and parents real clarity as to what the steps are in order to follow. So the policy and procedures and frequently asked questions and class organisation leaflets have all been brought together, so all of that information is in one place, but I can assure members there's no material change to policy.
Right. Please.
Hello there, it's just to query 6.6 of the policy, Gillian. I think there's an error. I think it's following their 5th birthday, it should be. It's on page 121, 6.6, where it talks about children with birthdays from 1st of September to 31st of December have the right to defer.
Thank you, Julie. We'll make sure that that's...
Ian?
Thank you, Gillian, for your response to that. Although there were one or two other minor points that I did mention. One of them was paragraph 3.7 on line 3. What exactly did that date mean, 2006/6? And also my comment on the fact there are no definitive cause for the rise in number of placements in the capping policy.
Sorry, Councillor, thank you. But certainly that the appeals from session 2627, so apologise for that typo. And certainly in 3.8, we don't feel that there is no definitive cause. We know there has been an increase in appeals, but there seems to be multifactorial. It could be new builds, there's patterns depending on new workplaces, demographic changes. So we know we have more places than children across Dumfries and Galloway, but those places are not always in the right place. So there are patterns of footfall, and we work hard to predict and plan for that.
Ian?
Okay, thank you for that. I do still have a number of points to make under the policy itself, but I did make a suggestion that it be withdrawn and be looked at again. But I'm quite happy to let other members come in and speak to the policy itself when the time comes.
Adam?
Thanks, Chair. I have a slight concern that there was actually a members' seminar on the governance policy only a number of weeks ago, and a number of these issues were discussed then, and that, you know, that information has been given to members and maybe circulated to help answer some of these problems.
John? Gillian?
Yes, indeed, Chair. There was a member seminar on these matters not long ago.
I appreciate the members' the seminar, but this policy was for parents, and the fact that there's a significant change.
Have the comments on the changes again?
There is no significant change, Councillor Blake. There is no material change to what we currently do. It's just to try and bring this policy into one policy rather than have parents to try and find information from various different sources. And we also intend to utilise the website once the policy has been approved to ensure that when we go through the enrolment process, which we'll be advertising next week for the primary 1 enrolment, and we'll be continuing to look at the primary 7s this next month, so that by the end of January, parents will have clear line of sight in terms of what the policy says and what the process is they need to undergo to enrol their children in their schools.
I do appreciate what you're saying, that it's to provide clarification to the parents, I should say. But any document that goes from 3.5 pages to 13 pages must contain an element of change. That's my only point on it.
Chair, if I can just answer that, my understanding from reading it is simply we're trying to increase the information that's available for people, and we're often accused perhaps of not providing enough information up front. So basically, as I understand it, and John could maybe confirm, it's the same policy, but simply spread out, taking lots of bits and pieces, doing a FAQ for the parents, and really it's just to provide additional information. My understanding is there is no material change to policy. I would hate us to go back to being accused of not providing enough information for parents, which has been the case in the past.
It certainly does seem a strange criticism. We are giving too much information and making it easy to access this, given the reassurances we've received from officers. So I'd certainly not support that. George, you're in?
Yeah, the Parents Forum have discussed this, and I've sat in the Appeals Committee. And one thing I would be very clear that there is a rationale and there's a need for the option of a parent looking for placement with the catchment. And if you've been involved with appeals procedures, there is exceptions that prove the rule. What we've always asked for is absolute clarity, and I would say we're getting that clarity. There is also a case to be made for verbal clarity, and if parents are unsure, and not all parents can pour through all these words, that there is somebody at the end of a phone to explain the situation, and I fully believe that that's the case. So I think there's a lot of empathy there between the Education Authority and parents who sometimes are really in a difficult position. And while I accept that most children should be heading for their catchment, and all our ambition is to evolve schools to of equal merit and no need to change, but there are circumstances where it's necessary. So the procedure has to be very clear, and there has to be an empathetic approach, I think, by the education authorities and an understanding by the parents. So as far as we're concerned, I think in the local parents forum, we think you've just about got it right.
Thanks for that, George. Okay. So with the assurances from the officers that the policy hasn't changed, can we move to the recommendations?
Sorry, Chairman, not quite. Where I'll accept your ruling that the policy has not been changed. It certainly hasn't changed in quantity, if not quality. If we go to the policy itself, I have a number of points that I would like to raise. And these, if we merely accepted that we put this policy through without discussion, it would miss some of the points that I'm going to raise. And there may very well be an explanation for it, but I won't know until I've asked these questions. Under section 8 on page 122, the reference to section 3, the content is almost a straight lift from the Education Scotland Act. But in saying that, the section contains some omissions to that, and some of the terminology has been changed. Now, I'm not expecting that you would reproduce the whole Education Scotland Act, but I feel there are one or two points that should be included. Point 1, if we start off with that, I assume that this should be preceded with the letter A because it seems to go into B, C, D, etc. after that. So that's just a minor point. The section refers to paragraphs 1 to 4. Paragraphs 5 and 6 are missing, and yet they refer to equally important issues such as serious detrimental order and discipline of the school and to the educational well-being of the school. Paragraph 7 is also missing, although it's reproduced at the bottom of the page 122, under section 28A, and it appears to be out of context there. Under section D, the wording has been changed to that contained within the Act, and I've heard it mentioned in several different ways here today. It refers to special educational needs, where the Act refers to additional support needs, as some of the officers have said today. In the last sentence of the first paragraph on page 123, it says that in the event that parents do not receive a written answer to the Council to their request by the 30th of April, the request is treated as if the Council has turned it down, and parents can then begin the appeal process. How can they, what could they appeal against? Because they've absolutely no idea of the grounds on which the refusal has been made. And this would certainly put them at a disadvantage to other parents that have been given the grounds. Paragraph 9.3 on page 124, on the last bullet point, it says, notify those arranging the hearing if you know anyone of the appeal committee members. I'd like to ask how this could be done, as appellants are not given details of the appeal members until they actually sit in front of them, and that would surely be too late to expect them to do that on the day. Finally, I refer to Appendix 2, page 133, and there certainly appears to be a lot of information missing on this. In relation to the S1 intake, it would appear that other than 2017 and 18, the only time that placements were initially refused was in 2007 and 8. And even then, we don't have the results of that. They're just question marks after that. My one final question that I would like to ask the Director, although he did cover it to a degree, although maybe with some confusion on the numbers, I think 20, in 2017-18, 20 were initially refused, 12 appealed, and all 12 of these were withdrawn. Now, I appreciate there is a footnote to say that the withdrawal can either be in the parents or on the authorities, but I would suggest probably in this case it was the authority that withdrew, and that's why they're 12. However, my question is, all 20 that were initially refused, I assume all 20 were awarded a place, irrespective of whether they went to appeal or not.
Can I work backwards? I'll just pick up the last 2 points just for absolute clarity. Page 133, there is nothing missing from the table. It's fully accurate. We haven't refused the S1 intake except in 2007-8. There's So there's no information missing from that table. It's absolutely accurate. Secondly, yes, everyone who was initially refused was phoned back up and offered a place. So there's two clarifications. I'll allow others to work their way backwards, maybe in some of the more technical detail.
Please forgive me if I miss any of those points. Working backwards, I have information on the members of the appeal process, the members who will be sitting on the appeal panel, and the question was raised about how they could let the appellants would know. John, is that?
Yeah, I mean, for those who have sat on panels in the past, it can be quite a challenge getting people together at the right time. But yeah, we'll certainly endeavour to try and ensure that that information is public before the appeal actually comes to fruition, Councillor Blake. So that's helpful. Thank you.
We will make sure that the A's, B's and C's are accurate and that paragraph is appropriately spaced, and it is my understanding that those paragraphs were direct lifts from our previous policy. Now clearly I had given assurances that there was no material change to our previous policy, so these were direct lifts from our 2016 policy agreed by members, so I had not changed those.
Ian? Can I suggest that they are changed now to include these? They appear to be fairly important omissions. And also, the only other one I think that you didn't cover was the appeal process, about the fact that if in the event of a not being informed, that they assume that it's been refused, but how could they appeal when they don't know the grounds of refusal?
Again, this was no material change, but I believe from previous versions of the policy that this was coming straight directly from the guidance for parents, and I've forgotten the name of it this very second. The choosing a school booklet, which is produced by the Scottish Government, and that information was taken directly because we thought that that would sit well within the policy in years gone by. But again, we're happy to have a look at that to make sure that there's real clarity around about the information that's being contained there, because you're right, if they don't know that they're not successful, then how can they possibly make that appeal?
Thank you, Jim. But that, just before I go, it certainly does show that there has been some material change.
Okay, can we move to the recommendations? Can we, 2.1, agree the revised school admission policy and procedure as detailed in Appendix 1 being implemented in full from December 2017 with any corrections as covered in the discussion? Can we agree 2.2 that the panel approach admission to resource provision for children with additional support needs as described in Section 7 of Appendix 1? And 2.3, note the appeals procedure for placing requests as detailed in Section 9 of Appendix 1. Okay. Ian?
I think given the number of changes to the school's admission policy, I think 2.1 that we need to see that again. And I'm quite happy to propose that.
Chair.
Sorry, we've already agreed it. I'm sure that you'll be giving a copy of the policy, the corrected policy.
Chairman, with respect, we didn't agree. You read 3 recommendations with your head
down.
No,
I went through them one by one and we agreed.
You read through 3 recommendations with your head
down. I read them individually. I asked members to agree 2.1. I read 2.1 out. Members agreed it. 2.2 I read out. Members agreed it. And 2.3 was noted.
I had my hand up to speak and you didn't acknowledge.
Chair, can we stop interruptions from the floor? You've made the decision and that's it.
Okay. So can we move on to item 9? Sorry, 8. Early Learning and Childcare Planning for the expansion towards 1140 hours by 2020. 2021, update November 2017. This report gives an update on progress of the expansion of early learning and childcare to 1140 hours, recognising that phasing will be over 4 years as agreed at the September committee. that schools and partners know which phase they're in for the expansion of 1140, that phase 1 engagement with parents has taken place in November 2017, and that phase 2 engagement will take place in the new year. The service delivery plan has been sent to the Scottish Government, and multi-year funding is expected in January. In addition, there will be an additional 50 million in revenue from the Government to allow local authorities to agree rates with partner providers so they can pay the living wage. And the Dumfries and Galloway plan is closely aligned to the future potential funding. And we have Liz and Rosie and Jim to sounds familiar to speak to this. Is there anything you want to add to the report? No. Okay, members. Adam.
Thank you, Chair. I think talking to Liz this morning, I said I don't envy our job in trying to implement the 1140 hours for our young people. But just on some issues that I've faced in my own ward regarding the implementation of this, two very different ones. And I was wondering if we could receive a more operational update on a ward basis of this. I know that, as a ward member, I've faced a number of questions from teachers and from parents, particularly after the meeting on the 9th of November. Some changes meant there was a change in how it was going to be implemented, but also in Appendix 2, in Phase 3, as part of that Phase 3 implementation, obviously Moffat Childcare no longer exists, and it would be handy to know exactly what impact that will have on the implementation and that Phase 3 process. So just if we could get an update on that, and if in future we could get an update every so often on a ward basis if there is going to be any changes to how it's going to be implemented, just so that we know how that operationally is going to be affected. Thank you.
Yes, we'd be happy to do that. We are going out to schools and meeting with partners on an area basis, but we'd be happy to update ward members.
Thank you, Chairman. It's just to pick up on a few points. I think there's still some discussions to be had with the PVI sector, and I would hope that that's ongoing through the childcare partnership, particularly in relation to the early funding for 3 and 4-year-olds. I think there needs to be a much wider debate. I would like to see it at committee, and I appreciate that they're on £4.01 just now, but they're anecdotally telling us that's not enough. And I think it moves towards the open book work. How we establish what they do require will be more difficult because they are bona fide private businesses. And I just wonder if we can find a slightly more creative approach in engaging with them rather than a full open book, because they are private businesses. They're under no obligation to share their accounts and such like with us. But can we find a way of working with them to establish their pressures? Because as I've said before, without them, we're not going to be able to deliver this. We know that. They're incredibly valuable to us. And it's just to pick up again on, and I'm sorry I wasn't at the last education meeting, the capital funding issue. We've got a lot of PVIs sort of rolling into the 18-19 programme, which is fairly imminent now. Have we nailed down their access to the capital funding issue and how they would access it, and the proportionality between the PVI sector and the local authority sector as well? And I think the only other thing that I would sort of say on this is that obviously in respect of the method that we're using for the phasing, I don't agree with that, but that's been agreed and I'm not going to go back on that. But what happens if a child is in an 1140 scenario and then there's a problem with that nursery and they have to move for, through no fault of their own to another one which is only offering 600? Is there any flexibility within individual circumstances? It could be that the child is being bullied or an issue that's not been able to be remedied. Would that family then be disadvantaged by going from an 1140 within their postcode area to potentially being forced to have to go to one that's only offering 600? Is there an element of flexibility? It's probably not going to happen often, but it might happen. And that comes down to parental choice as well and protection of the child. So there's a few things in there for you to answer.
I've been to a number of the childcare partnership meetings recently where the hourly rates being discussed. Most recently yesterday afternoon in a very hot room up at the Lochside Educational Centre. I think I know where all the council's heating budget's going now. I think it's Lochside. And I think yesterday there was definite progress in terms of the open book and what was being expected of the various providers. But I'll let the officers comment on it.
Yeah, thank you. In terms of the open book, we had a discussion yesterday afternoon with the Childcare Partnership about our requirement to understand what particular cost pressures that they have within Dumfries and Galloway. I think it's worth pointing out, and then we did share it yesterday with the private sector, that we pay £4.1 in the PBI rate. We are the 6th highest paying council in Scotland. If we've done a survey of PBI rates, and some councils pay as low as £3.23 an hour, and their PBI sector is managing to operate. So we have difficulty understanding at this point why it would be that the Dumfries PBI sector is having such difficulty, and that's why I want to understand the particular drivers. It may well be that rates of pay for the private sector are higher than others across Scotland. That's a major determinant of the cost base of the PBI sector. So if we can get access to that type of information, it would allow us to understand more and respond to the anecdotal evidence that's been sent to us regarding we're finding it really difficult to survive on £4.1. What we'd also say is that the voluntary sector also operate across Dumfries and Galloway and have the same ratios regarding 2-year-olds and 3- and 4-year-olds. And we're quite confident we will get the open book approach from the voluntary sector, who perhaps don't have the same issues as the private sector regarding, their private books. And I think we will be interested to see what kind of trends come through the voluntary sector, because they will have their staffing, they'll have the running costs, and they'll have their income from the council and any potential wraparound care. And we did commit that we would try and conclude the exercise by January, so that we could bring something back to committee. Maybe regarding the capital point, there have been discussions with the Scottish Government. That was shared with the Childcare Partnership yesterday. There have been issues regarding state aid and their ability to give money to the private sector, and whether or not that complies with EU regulations in terms of council supporting a private business through its funds. That being said, officers are liaising with legal services to try and get to the bottom of it, and there was a commitment made just to the Childcare Partnership that if it was possible to do that, and if that capital was in areas where there was need, because we couldn't be building an additional nursery provision in an area where the capacity was already there to take 1140. And it was highlighted that Dumfries could potentially be the area where there would be a potential mismatch, where there could be fewer spaces than there are children. And that might be the area where capital could be levered into the PBI sector, subject to rules and bidding and various other things.
Just to come back on that, I mean, I appreciate that we're the 6th highest, if you want to put it that way, in Scotland, but we've also got one of the largest rural demographics, in the whole of Scotland. So I think is it Argyll and Bute that are the 2nd highest, which is one of our comparator authorities. So I prefer to compare ourselves to the top than to very urban settings at the bottom, which I think they probably are. I thought the capital issue had been resolved. And the PVI sector could bid into it. That was my understanding. I think that was reported to the CCP 3 meetings ago. That was my clear understanding, that the capital funding issue had been absolutely resolved. So I'm not entirely sure where that information is coming from. But I do think we need to nail that down, because we can't expect this 1140 to be delivered by ourselves, and we're already costing 25%, 30% more to deliver per child than the PVI sector is anyway. So if I'm going with following the public pound, the PVI sector are actually offering better value for money, but I understand this is about outcomes for children. So I think that we have to accept that investing in the PVI sector, and it is the VI sector as well, it's not just private, it's the VI sector, is going to require capital investment. If they don't have enough facilities to take those children into the premises and deliver the 1140, we're going to fail on our targets, and that will reflect badly on us. So I think we need to get these issues nailed down, and soon, and a fuller report on the impact this is going to have on the PVI sector going forward as well.
Well, it's fairly obvious that yesterday afternoon's meeting that the capital issue hadn't been resolved. It was still being debated. Liz, you want in?
Yes. The PVI sector had met with the former Children's Minister, Mark MacDonald, who said it could be accessed. Prior to meeting with the child, we sought clarity with that from the government. We haven't got that clarity yet, and we're still waiting for a statement from them.
John?
Well, I find this a very complicated subject, but we've been fortunate to have at least 3 meetings with the private sector in the council offices here, where they've been explaining their problems to us, largely around finance, of course. And it's worrying to me that they all seem to have the same thing, that there is insufficient money to take the capacity which they're being required to do. But if they're not able to take it, then the system will fall down because there's not sufficient slack in the council provision to take in if these companies go bankrupt. Now, what they're telling us is that they are likely to go bankrupt because they can't afford the wages, and therefore they will, because they're businesses, they will just close. I mean, and that is a threat to us and our parents, and all our parents who have children who are expecting to receive this increased care. I mean, are we absolutely convinced that we've got it right and people will be able to have sufficient money to run their businesses so that we do have sufficient places for all the parents? Because I'm not sure that is correct, listening to the private sector.
Well, that's the purpose of the exercise which you're undergoing at the moment. We've got to also remember, at the moment we get 600 hours, the early years. That's going to go up to 1,140, and that would obviously be funded by the Scottish Government. At the moment, I don't know if we know what rate the Scottish Government's going to put in place for the expansion of the. Obviously, we don't. You would like to add anything, Liz?
It was just to respond to Councillor McGregor's scenario question, which was that the phasing is on an area basis and a cluster basis, so there's likely to be other providers offering 1140 within that area.
Thanks, Chair. Can I just add to that one? And that was about somebody maybe going to an 1140 and then having to go back to 600. I think that we've spoken before at committee about this. It's inherently a difficult situation, a phasing agenda. Because if over 4 years the money is being phased in, the recruitment of staff is being phased in, then it absolutely must mean that some people in some areas are getting more time than others, and therefore you can look at that as unfair. There's no other way to look at that. It's very difficult. The other way to look at it is wait for 4 years for everybody to get the same, in which case we don't get the advantages on the run-in. So that's a national agenda in terms of how the agenda is being funded. It will create some challenges. It is creating challenges, but ultimately I think it's quite important to remember it's still really, really good news. Big investment for young people and pushing resources to upstream somewhat.
Jim?
Thanks, Chair. What safeguards are there to prevent children drifting away from the late phase nurseries to those which have been expanded earlier? You know, in mid-Galloway, we have, I think, about 8 nurseries in the same postcode area. 4 or 5 of them are in phase 1 and 2 are in phase 4.
Liz?
What we've done in terms of the phase 1 is we've looked very closely at the whole string of the postcode, and we've managed to enrol all of the children within those 5 additional schools that are going live with 1140 and early access offer in January. And we are looking at the streets within those postcodes as well to mitigate against any movement. But so far that's been successful, and all of the children within those nurseries are able to access the early offer of the additional hours.
Yes, but what about the 2 late phase nurseries? There is a danger that they will be left with surplus places.
Could you repeat the question, please?
Yes. What are the safeguards to prevent children drifting away from late phase nurseries to those which have been expanded earlier?
The way the postcodes are being operated is that some nurseries will be switched on and the providers in that area will offer early access. If you're in an area that hasn't got the early access and you're a provider that doesn't provide the early access, then nobody can take that early access.
Yes, but all these nurseries are in the same postcode area.
And that's exactly what we're looking at. And we're going. We've only gone as far as phase 2 and 3 at the moment, and that's what we're working on. But we'll keep you updated on that.
Can I just say we've already agreed the phasing, so to a certain extent, I think you could discuss this out with the committee. Gail?
Thank you for your indulgence, Chair. I think Jim's raised a very interesting point because we do have Busy Bees in phase 2, 18-19, but Lochmaben not until 2021. Now that's going to cover a very similar postcode, if not exactly the same postcode. So I think we are going to start to see challenges where people are going to get wind that Busy Bees is coming online in 18-19, but Lochmaben local authority is not coming online until 2021. And you will find that people will move.
If I can just respond to that, it's actually Lochmaben and JBs in Lochmaben, and Busy Bees is in Stranraer. I couldn't give you the exact percentage of uptake, but there has been a very positive uptake. And what we've noticed in the early schools in Penningham and Minnegaff Community Nursery and in Kellerholm and Sanka is that parents are increasing their hours. They have started to take additional hours and they've come back and increased them even further.
Can we move to the recommendations? Members are asked to note 2.1, 2.2. Thank you. And move to item 9. On page 173, this is the annual performance report, School Meals Service 2016-17. The annual performance report on school meals highlights a continued positive meal uptake in both primary and secondary schools. The report shows a slight decrease in primary meals of 1%, and this decrease can be attributed to the P3 free meals transition to P4. P1 to P3 free meals is performing well and sits 5th in Scotland at an 88% meal uptake. Secondary meals continue the positive trend and sits 9th in Scotland at 55.77% meal uptake. The report also highlights the ongoing projects to continue the positive trend in uptake. Point 3.5 raises awareness of concerns relating to the consultation document Appendix 6, A Healthier Future, and the possible impact on school meals depend on the outcome of the consultation in relation to school food and drink regulations. And I'm also pleased to note the good uptake of free school meals in primaries 4 to 7 and in secondary, and that's something which we need to continue to work on as part of our anti-poverty action. So we have Alan and Gillian to speak to this report. Alan, is there anything you want to add?
Just state straight to questions, Chair, if that's okay, after the introduction time.
Members? Katie?
Thank you, Chair. My question relates around sort of item 3.14, which talks about the further development of the school meals. I've noticed from certainly in the primary school meals options, there are several days in the 4-week calendar that there are absolutely no vegetarian options available. Now, I do note that there's going to be the appointment of a school nutrition and improvement officer, and I would just ask that it's well documented the benefits of a vegetarian diet, and that certainly there should be at least one vegetarian option, if not, unlike other council areas where they have a hot vegetarian option and a cold vegetarian option. So we just ask the officers perhaps look at that in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, Chair, thanks for that. I think it's a valid point. I think in the implementation of the nutrition post is something that we're looking at that. We've got a special diet policy that we try to tie that into. History has shown us that it's not it's not an uptake, but it's a growing business. And I think even from an environmental areas, we've been looking at the impact that can have, and we're working with suppliers with potentially offering some vegetarian themed days as well. So noted through that, Chair, and we'll take it on board. Thank you.
Ian?
Thank you, Chairman. Don't worry, it's one simple question this time, and it may be my failing memory. St Peter's Primary, could someone maybe refresh my memory of when St Peter's closed? Probably Councillor Davidson would be best placed to answer that one.
My memory's fading rapidly as a result of the freezing temperatures in here, I'm afraid. I think Councillor Stipp might be able to help.
I believe it was 2015.
David's wearing the warm cardigan, so he's still working.
Thank you, Chairman. In that case, time flies. It's just the Appendix 1, the final part, and it has St Peter's Primary, the school roll nil right the way through, and yet we've managed to get a 14% uptake in free and paid meals. Now, I thought that it was possibly down to the reporting period, but if it was 2015 it closed, that can't be right.
Yeah, Chair, valid point noted. An error in the spreadsheet we've got based on the fact we just haven't omitted it from the list, based on no pupil uptakes. Apologies from my side.
Hi there. I was wondering if I could ask a question about early learning and childcare settings, because they're also offering school meals and free school meals, and there's no mention in this paper of that, and I wondered if the elected members were aware of that.
Yeah, Chair, we're working with the early years team in the 1140 at the moment of implementation of that in the phase 1 for the beginning of next year. We're still looking at considering the funding and implications that got, but it's a provision that we will be offering from a perspective of a council provision and council premises. Sitting in a national group under APSI, under 1140, looking at the implications of the rest of Scotland and that. So it's very early days on the food side from that side, but we certainly will be integrating it within the 1140 based on the phasing that you've seen in the paper prior to, Chair.
Okay, I've got no one indicate. Oh, Jim.
Just a light note, since we seem to be winding up, Chair. Page 222, question 11 intrigues me. I know it's a Scottish consultation document.
Noted. Right. The members are asked to 2.1, note the performance of school meal services detailed at 3.2. Is that noted? 2.2, note the school meal uptake for all primary and secondary schools as detailed at appendices 1 and 2. And 2.3, note the programme of further development for school meals as detailed at 3.14. I think members will be pleased that I haven't got any other business. So thanks for your attendance, and Merry Christmas to you all and best wishes for 2018.